Alrighty, hello everyone. So today we're just doing sort of a follow-up video to our retrospective and review on Watch Dogs 1 and 2. But this time we're going to be talking about Assassin's Creed, which is sort of our preferred franchise coming from Ubisoft, or at least it is for me. I know we both have quite a big history with the Assassin's Creed franchise as a whole, so we have quite a lot to get through on this one. We won't be going too into detail on each individual game, but we would just like to go sort of over how the franchise sort of developed, and then where it sort of started to decline, and where it's at now today, and then sort of what we want to see maybe in future. So let's sort of jump straight into it, I suppose. Let's do it. So I guess it was originally released in 2007. This was just the original Assassin's Creed, and it was definitely heavily inspired by Prince of Persia. I think that's confirmed, like, pretty much 100%, like, through factual statements.
Yeah, so it's the same team. It was the same team, Ubisoft, that did it. Ubisoft in Montreal. Yeah. And so what happened was they were starting to die. They needed to kill that franchise. They had quite a few successful games, and obviously there was a movie that also came out on that. But they wanted to bring it, I guess, a bit more modern, and so they went with this, I guess, slightly new take, and also that was what influenced the original game setting, being in sort of the same part of the world, really. So it was like the modernized version of like a Prince of Persia game. We were introduced to this kind of really cool story of like Altair, who was like an assassin, and the assassins were real as well, historically acted like real. This assassin who was really like advanced, but had a bit of like hubris and a bit of arrogance, and this story of like, in the Crusades of the Knights Templar and the assassins. And we were also introduced to this like technology of which was called the Animus, which allowed like the descendants of these people to like tap into parts of the memories of their ancestors. And this company Abstergo were trying to do it. It turned out to try and find something called the Peace of Eden, which would help them, I don't know, rule the world or whatever. What did the Peace of Eden actually do? Do you remember?
I mean, it's got a little bit ridiculous in current years, but the original Peace of Eden was sort of just like the power of like sort of illusion and control, so you could sort of make people do what you want. And their goal was technically peace. Like, they wanted to use it to make everybody peaceful, and it was, it wasn't like the end goal was acceptable, but the way they went about it was not, and that's sort of what the whole plot of the first game was. And there was I won't even be bothered to say that it's spoiler talk, because this is a very old game. If you haven't played Assassin's Creed and you're watching this video, just go play them.
Stop right now. Go to your PlayStation 3. Go to the network and pay the like $15 to get the first 4 games. Yeah. Seriously.
But yeah, the final fight in Assassin's Creed is against Altair's sort of previous master, I suppose, Al-Mualim. And he sort of had the same goal as the Templars, despite being an assassin. So it kind of became this, and Abstergo, I guess. The Templars and Abstergo are kind of one of the same.
Well, Abstergo was a company created by the Templars, yeah.
Yeah. So they're basically the same thing. And Al-Mualim was an assassin who had the same ideals as the Templars, but wanted to do it himself. So a lot of it was sort of morally grey in terms of villains, and the assassins, again, like they're people who kill for the greater good. So they're not even really the pinnacle of good either. And I think that's a lot of what the draw was for the game, was that there was these two sides that you can kind of see as good and evil, but they were both kind of in the grey zone anyways, sort of working in the shadows. And yes. That was basically Assassin's Creed 1, and it really I don't actually think it did that well straight away, did it?
It did pretty damn well. It was advertised pretty well, and it came out. It was for the Christmas release season, with the first big Christmas of that generation of consoles. I think the 7th generation is what it was. So PS3 and Xbox 360. So it was really well timed, and so actually it did do pretty well. The first one, I think it did the best out of most of them, and it was sustained sales as well as an initial jump. What really did well for it was that it was graphically very good for the time. It kind of showed off these 3 ancient cities, but it also like presented a new type of combat, which originally I saw was being touted for a Fable 2 release. In some of the old videos of Peter Molyneux promising the world and never delivering, you saw combat almost exactly the same style as the Assassin's Creed, where you would stand in a circle and do like the what do you call it, parry and counter like moves in the same kind of way. And it didn't appear in Fable 2, but it did appear in the first Assassin's Creed game. So that was something I thought was really, really good about it. But also what it did was it had these two stories almost going, like the current / near future Desmond, who is obviously the descendant of Altair, and the thing that he was being tested on by Abstergo, and a very real threat of these other people that had apparently gone crazy and killed themselves or whatever. They'd pushed too far, and so you had these small glimpses of like the current day. Without too much being released of that, but then you had this like kind of awesome story of having to go out and assassinate targets and doing it in various different ways. It probably was a little bit repetitive, looking back on it in terms of the ways you did it, but I think you could probably overlook that and not really care too much, because it was pretty awesome, I thought.
Yeah, so I think the way they did it was you sort of had this build up for each contract. There was 9 of them. And it sort of built up in a way where you would sort of, I guess, go gather information on your target. You'd like pickpocket, or you'd listen to like a town crier, or you'd beat somebody up until they tell you what you need to hear. And that part was very repetitive, but I think the actual individual targets are all fairly memorable to me, because they each had sort of a different gimmick, and they were all working towards the same goal. And each time when you finally got the target and you were like, yes, I finally, I've got this, I assassinated this target, you get put into the classic Assassin's Creed like memory sequence where Altair will like collect their blood on a feather, and they'll test his sort of faith in the assassins like Brotherhood, and they'll tell him like, oh, I did all of this for the greater, like for our greater goal. And Altair's understanding of why he was killing each target was shaken each time, and every time you'd go back to Al Mualim, he'd give you a new rank in the Assassin's Order again, return one of your weapons, and you'd feel the victory at first, but then Altair would start questioning Al Mualim and say, it would sort of build up in a way that didn't feel boring to me, even playing it multiple times, because it's like, you do feel like each kill is kind of questionable, like, are you on the right side of this one? So yeah, I personally very much enjoyed that, aside from the sort of information gathering, which they got rid of subsequently, because I think they knew that was the weakest part.
They did, and I think part of that was, obviously for game hours as well as anything else, or as much as anything else. But as I said, I still think you can overlook that. A lot of people now look back and think the first one was one of the weaker ones. I mean, I still look back at it with a lot of affection. I just not long ago replayed it for the first time in probably 10 years at least, and still really, really enjoyed it, to be honest. And I like Altair. People have said that, like, as a character, him to Ezio, who appears in the next few, they said Ezio obviously is much more charismatic, and that's probably true. But I actually quite like the Altair character personally. A little bit stoic, a little bit low key, but he still had a massive character arc, still in that one game. And then we saw obviously a lot of it in I think was it Assassin's Creed Revelations, which we'll get onto in a little bit. But
I'll talk about his full arc in Revelations.
Yeah. Also, just by the by, this also sparked a massive book series for tie-ins, some that were of the game, some that were separate, and a lot of those were very interesting too. So it definitely spawned something. But let's move on to, I guess, the Ezio games, particularly Assassin's Creed 2 and Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, and then we can talk about Brotherhood in a minute, but not Brotherhood, sorry, Revelations in a minute. But Assassin's Creed 2 and Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, they moved to Ezio Auditore da Firenze, I think was his full name, and he is like the son of a rich kind of merchant guy, and he's a bit of a ladies' man and a bit of a troublemaker, and he's in Italy in the Renaissance era, which is a pretty cool era too. Basically, he watches as his father is betrayed, and I think his father and 1 or 2 brothers are basically beheaded in front of him.
2, yeah.
Yep. Which really sets up his story arc and giving him cause for concern, and his family, how they have to sort of go a bit into hiding. And basically, he ends up going against the what was the family called?
The party, I think.
The Borgia, the Borgias and
the Borgia
parties.
in Brotherhood, yeah.
Basically, it went all the way up to like the Pope, essentially. Hence the trip to Rome for Brotherhood. But what they did is they also introduced some new features, some new sort of not gadgets, but almost. And obviously, one of the things they always had is historical figures coming up. So in the first one, you had like Robert de Sable, you had Richard Lionheart. All the rest of it, and then in this one you had people like I think Marco Polo. You had famously Leonardo da Vinci, who becomes a very good friend of Ezio, and a few others as well, which is always kind of quite nicely done. Rodrigo Borgia, obviously himself, was a real character too, a real life historical character. I mean, and I think he was Pope at one point. But in any case, like, it was a really good story. Assassin's Creed 2, you're in Florence, and you're in, was it Venice, that one? I think it was Venice. Yeah. And then you've got like, no man's land almost, like in the first one, in between, where you can travel a bit more and there's a bit more freedom in that. And then Brotherhood is specifically in one city, and it was the start of a few games that did this. One city was in Rome, but what they did is they had this bigger city, so it still had enough to do, right?
You have overstepped your bounds.
Yeah, so I think with Assassin's Creed 2, I think the reason why 2 is pretty much considered, like, by everybody to be the best Assassin's Creed game, aside from perhaps Brotherhood, is just because everything that they learned from Assassin's Creed 1, they capitalized on in 2. They created a more sort of likable character in Ezio. I still, again, as we said, I like Altair as well, but Ezio is one of the, to this day, still one of the most well-written and believable game protagonists of all time, in my opinion. And I think it's hard for people to sort of debate that, because he just has such a believable sort of plot line that stems from 3 different games, not just one. He goes from, he develops from Assassin's Creed 2 all the way through to Revelations. He isn't just sort of a stagnant character. He goes from this sort of the cocky sort of ladies' man at the start, who doesn't know his father is actually an assassin. He thinks his father's just a wealthy merchant, to eventually sort of unraveling the truth behind both his family heritage, and eventually becoming basically like a grandmaster, mentor, old man character in Revelations, who's not as spry or young anymore, but he still sort of has the knowledge to back up his actions, and he isn't as rash anymore.
Yes, and he's got a few old tricks and everything that look, I agree, and I think that these were the things that worked very, very well for the early games. And getting to Revelations was obviously the combination of both his and Altair's story in one game, really. More so his, but there is a lot about the Altair story when Altair is in his 90s, back at Masyaf, and how that kind of ties in with one of the rival characters of his from the Assassin's Order back in the first game. Was it Abbas? Abbas, yeah, not Malik.
Malik was the person who he sort of, because of his arrogance, caused him to lose his arm and nearly die. Which again is Altair's problem.
And his brother died.
And his brother did die, yeah. And I think that's one of the best quotes from Assassin's Creed 1 is that whenever you go to Jerusalem to the assassins, I can't remember what they're called, the little dojo or whatever, their little building. If you talk to Malik, you'd say safety and peace to him, and he would respond your presence here deprived me of both. And then by the end, after your growth, when you go back to Masyaf and Al Mualim has betrayed Altair, Malik actually ends up becoming Altair's greatest sort of ally and friend, and he says safety and peace, and Malik responds with your presence here will deliver me both. So it's both characters have big growth and arcs, but I definitely think Ezio, they took whatever growth Altair had and kind of turned it to 100. So I think that's why a lot of people still to this day think he's the best character in Assassin's Creed.
So I think overview wise, you had 2 very, very good Assassin's characters out of the first 4 games, and you had some really good development from both. But you also had in the background, in the modern day, you had Desmond's sort of arc with Lucy, who was supposed to be this assistant at Abstergo, turning out to be an assassin as well. And although they kind of killed their own lore with her reveal, where they revealed her to have lost her finger, i.e. for the hidden blade. But in like one of the Assassin's Creed, I think the Assassin's Creed 2 game, they actually revealed that they no longer needed to cut off the finger for the hidden blade. But whatever, like it was still a really good reveal when it happened. And I think there was a lot of good stuff bubbling under the surface with the modern day story, where you escape Sturgo with her, you go to this other group that are sort of like assassins, I guess, as well, to a certain extent. And you go into their animus, their sort of homemade animus almost, because you've got to try and help them find it before the Templars do. And essentially, they were building to this, or it felt like they were building to this game that would eventually be in the modern world. And we'll get to that in another video, but those games were great, and they were sort of released every couple of years on the most part. I think Assassin's Creed 2 came out in 2009, I believe, and I think Brotherhood came out in 2010. I think that's how it happened. So it was 2 years between Assassin's Creed and Assassin's Creed 2, and then it was 1 year to Brotherhood. But Brotherhood, the step up on Brotherhood wasn't like huge in terms of they still used a lot of the same engine. It was a lot of the same designs, and you know what I mean. It was not like crazy different. So it made sense, but it was good. And then Revelations came out in 2011. So it was a couple. But before Revelations came out, after Revelations came out in 2012, there was Assassin's Creed 3, which, from my point of view, I thought was the beginning of a slow decline. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. So I actually, I remember getting really, really excited with one of my friends over the trailer of Assassin's Creed 3. I think that it's another case of Ubisoft. I guess their marketing team is just better than their actual developing team, or the team that did this one in particular, because I remember getting extremely excited over some of the things that they were showing. Like the tree parkour was pretty big, because in the previous games, trees were just kind of there. You could only really parkour on buildings and rock faces at best. Mostly just buildings, but in this they were showing, like rock faces, there was different trees you could climb on, there was the hunting mechanics, like all these different things that they were adding, and it just turned out to be quite a disappointment. And I think more so disappointing in the present day, or modern day or future day or whatever you want to call it, the Desmond Miles sort of aspects were where it really, really let itself down for the rest of the series. And I think it's probably the biggest turning point for a franchise I've seen in a long time, because pretty much one decision that they made at the end of Assassin's Creed 3 was all it took to kind of ruin the franchise for me. And you could talk about that if you'd like, because I think you know exactly what I'm talking about.
I would love to. I'd really love to get stuck in on it, but I think so. So obviously, Assassin's Creed is this game of dichotomy. It's this game of the ancestors' memories and the controlling of the assassin from the past in this historical situation. But it's also the sort of the modern day story and how that's going. I think the first thing that comes to mind is there was obviously North America being obviously a very big market for them. There would have been big calls for, and this is the other thing about Assassin's Creed, is that people requesting obviously historical locations and historical times to be featured in the games. And I think what they did well in the first 4 is that they didn't cave into any of those demands. They chose the ones that made sense in I guess the Levant region, with Syria and Jerusalem and whatnot, then Italy, and then obviously they went to Constantinople or Istanbul, modern day times. That made sense. But then I think it felt to me like they caved to sort of some pressure, and that was the start of when they wanted to just make money. And they went to this the period Civil War era, or not even Civil War era. It was what would it be? It would have been like the independence kind of war era of North America, particularly America. And they went to New England, like Boston and whatnot. And so they included the assassin's character, who was like half British and half Native American. And the issue that I had with it is that the city parkour was not good, because the buildings weren't very good for it compared to before. And the nature stuff wasn't really done well enough either. And then a lot of the missions were just boring. And I just found a lot of the story very boring. And that's just how it was. I just found it very, very boring. And like one mission in particular, for example, where you're controlling a cavalry, not cavalry, what's the right word? You're telling people when to like fire across, a battlefield. Like, but you're not actually fighting. You're just standing and they're going, okay, fire, aim here, fire. And it was like, this is boring. So I found that they messed up the historical part. I think they jumped the gun going to that setting. I think they should have waited to go to that setting. It wasn't there yet. I don't think it was ready yet. And then they destroyed the modern day story by essentially killing off not just the protagonist character, but also the main love interest, all in one go.
Yeah, so they basically completely ruined the entire, like, the two people that you've spent the most time with in the modern day from game one. Both of them die pretty much in one go. And yeah, it was just a complete destruction of, like, the modern day. I think since then they have still yet to really capture anything close to what they had. I think it was a huge mistake to kill either of them off, and it just, yeah, it's a real shame, I think, because modern day was never my favorite part of the Assassin's Creed games, but it really kept you going because you at least had a reason to be in the Animus, and you had sort of a character to relate to that's being, going through this stuff and seeing their ancestors, and now it's just nothing.
Well, you had this relatable character that sort of made sense of some of it, but you also had this guy that was obviously he was an assassin too, and you got these little snippets that he'd come from, like he'd left, like almost like the Assassin's Commune when he was younger because he rejected all of that. Like his parents lived there, so he was obviously knew about it from when he was younger anyway, and so it was this idea of like how you could have an assassin in the modern day. And again, we're going to make another video on this because there's a really big thing in there, but that was what I was thinking it was gradually going to build towards. Like you had all these historical settings, but it was building towards like a modern day, like almost like not quite like a World War III, but like a battle ultimately for which one eventually will be totally killed off and which one will survive, which side. And you would be like Desmond as the leader of the assassins going into that. That's what I felt like it was sort of building towards almost, the way you'd eventually do more stuff in the modern day. But then they just completely just killed that right there and then. And every subsequent, and to be honest, Assassin's Creed 3 was what basically put me off the franchise. I think I've bought 2 games since. So you're going to be more the eyes and ears and the storyteller for what goes on in a lot of them next. But, I guess my opinion on that is there because I was put off by it enough that I was like, I'm done. And then the next games that came out were like pirate stuff. And to me, I was like, it just wasn't something that, again, I think that was capitalizing on like Pirates of the Caribbean almost. Going, oh, everyone seems to like pirates at the moment, let's go and do that. And there might have been good things to those games, but I didn't bother playing them because to me it just felt like it was just going to be crap and not Assassin's Creed as we knew it. Would you differ from that at all?
Yeah, so I personally still think Assassin's Creed 4 was a sort of, not necessarily a good comeback, but I don't think it should have been called Assassin's Creed 4. I would have been happy for it to just be called Black Flag and just been, separated aside from, because basically for the majority of the plot, you're not even an assassin anyways. The modern day is non-existent. They could have just taken it out. You're literally just playing as a first-person camera that moves around. There's no person behind your eyes, basically. It's just supposed to be you. Could have just been completely cut. But the actual gameplay, the story was pretty good. If I look at it as not an Assassin's Creed follow-on, if it was just called Black Flag, it's probably one of my favorite games in the series. But because it's still called Assassin's Creed Black Flag, the majority of the game, you're not an assassin, and you're not really dealing with Templars either. And in fact, most of the game is you causing damage to both orders and then kind of rectifying it by choosing one at the end. And it's like, it doesn't necessarily need to happen at all like that. It could have just been its separate thing, and I would have enjoyed it a lot more. But I think it's still better than 3. So at least they had a better dev team on 4, in my opinion.
And what Unity, what was that all about?
Okay, I'll do Unity after Rogue, because all of these are tied in. From 3 to 4 to Rogue to Unity, they're all kind of tied together in the same, like, sort of 50-year to 100-year span. So there's a lot of sort of characters that connect. So Rogue is basically like a prequel to Assassin's Creed 3, and it might have the most annoying and frustrating plot of any Assassin's Creed game in the whole series.
This was sort of Latham Kenway.
It's so he's in it, but you basically play as Cormac O'Shea. So you're like a Irish, like,
Of course.
you start off as an assassin, and basically the Brotherhood of Assassins in like the America like region are sending assassins out to collect like these artifacts from places, and one of them is in Portugal. I think Lisbon. There was like a massive like historical earthquake there, right, in real life. I think it was Lisbon.
Possibly.
But basically, your character is sent there to collect this artifact, and when you remove it, it causes the earthquake to happen. So you're essentially responsible for you know, thousands to hundreds of thousands of deaths. And quite rightfully, your character comes back to the Brotherhood and literally tells them, "No, I'm not doing that shit again. We're responsible for thousands of deaths by taking these artifacts. We can't do it anymore. We have to like protect the artifacts and not let people remove them." And for whatever reason, I guess it's just because the plot demands it, the assassins are just assholes to your character. And they're like, "No, you're a traitor now," basically. So again, your character does nothing wrong at all, really. Like, he was doing what he was told. He sees he's doing the wrong thing, so he tries to tell them. And they get angry at him, and literally, they shoot him off a cliff. So, for the rest of the game, even though the game's only like 10 hours long, it's really, really short. And I thank God, because it's not that fun. You go around killing each of the like assassin leaders as a Templar, and that, you know, it was an interesting take. Could have been a good idea, but it's just so annoying that the plot was set up in such a forced way that you kind of just don't believe it, because the assassins just being assholes because the game needs you to not like them so that you can feel justified in killing them, when really, like, it was always grey from the beginning. We already talked about this, but Templars and assassins weren't that different to begin with. So you don't need to force the assassins to look like bad guys. I'm happy to play as a bad guy. That's fine. I don't care. But anyways, yeah. So then moving into Unity, the character you play as in Rogue actually kills the main character's dad. I can't remember the main character's name. I didn't really like Unity either. But in the like opening sort of cinematic and stuff, your father is killed by Cormac from Assassin's Creed Rogue. And eventually your character sort of leads down the path of becoming an assassin himself. The plot's pretty much just based on like the Revolution, I believe, the French Revolution. So nothing too crazy. Again, it sort of feels like that they were just doing that because it's a time period they hadn't done yet. As we said with Assassin's Creed 3, it's almost like they didn't actually want to do a game there. They just sort of decided to do it because that's a time frame they hadn't touched yet.
Cashing on it.
Yeah. I didn't really like the main character. He was kind of like a discount Ezio. Like, I think that's what they were going for, and it didn't really work. And his primary love interest turns out to be the daughter of like an important Templar. And they try to do this thing where like the two sides are supposed to just kind of like come to an agreement in France to stop the revolution. And again, it just wasn't a very good game. Especially on launch, it was one of the most buggy, messy games that have ever come out from Ubisoft, and I think they're never going to do anything that bad again, because that was not a good launch.
And what year was it?
What year was Unity? Let me check. Assassins. Let's have a quick look. Came out in 2014, right at the end. So
okay,
we're getting.
So this was right in the era of annual releases, basically. So
yeah,
Assassin's Creed 3 came out 2012.
Yeah.
And we've already mentioned, what, 3 games now? So it would have been 2013, at least 2, 2014, like 1 or 2. So there's at least annual launches at this point, it feels like. I was switched off during this period.
Yeah.
None of it appealed to me. My ears pricked up when we got a Victorian London setting.
Yeah,
which I've always said would be a good setting if done well. And that was Assassin's Creed Syndicate, which came out at the end of 2015. Which I believe I got for you for Christmas that year. And I've played it a couple of times myself. And again, I was going to say, in this one, there's almost no reference to modern day. And I'm guessing that's been a thing throughout the last couple as well. They just stopped referencing modern day, basically.
Yeah, it's fully dead. And they're not going to fix it. And I think with Syndicate, you know, where some of the other games maybe weren't that good, I think Syndicate was the final sort of nail in the coffin, because they almost the two protagonists were maybe some of the worst we've ever seen. So they gave us two, a male and a female, brother and sister, Jacob and Evie Fry. Jacob was a complete joke of a character. I despise playing as him. I hate it. It's
He
the
was
worst.
supposed to be though. He was supposed to be. Just want to throw that out there. Sorry.
I know, but it was just awful. Like, it wasn't funny. It wasn't good. It just was not fun to play as him. And then Evie was supposed to be the sort of closer to an assassin character, but even her, I think I remember telling you during my first playthrough, there was this one fight you have with like a female Templar like leader or like high up figure, and outside of the cutscene in the actual boss fight, I was destroying this person, right? Absolutely destroying, like not getting hit, not making any mistakes, no worries. As soon as I get her below a certain health, cutscene starts, and she's just shitting on Evie like it's nothing. I'm like, okay, so that's the point where I switch off from the plot because the characters just aren't
Yeah.
out to be at all.
Well, it was the game that switched me back on, and it was probably because of the setting more than anything else. So they won with me in the sense that I gave them money because they set it in a place that I liked. So exactly what we've been talking about a little bit in this video. I enjoyed the setting because it's Victorian London. As I said, I think Victorian London has a lot of legs. And then you get the typical, you get Jack the Ripper references, you get Charles Dickens references. You get all of that kind of stuff. And it did look pretty good. And also, beginning of the game starts in a train yard in Croydon. Shout out to the hometown, Croydon. So that was also kind of cool, even though it didn't look anything like Croydon, and there probably wouldn't have been a train yard like that in Croydon at the time, or that it could have been. But anyway, shout out nonetheless. But it looked graphically, like, again, it was nice graphically for the time. But yeah, like you say, it was very dead. It was very, very dead, if you ask me. Like, no real character to it anymore. And that seemed to be like the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of style, where they then almost went back to the drawing board and did actually have a think about how they can change things up. And then a year and a half later,
I think it was 2
years almost, they came out with Origins, set in ancient Egypt, which is another particularly good setting for it, you'd think, but they went with a more RPG style feel, right? A bit more open, a bit more of an RPG with like proper levels up and all the rest of it. I got this game last year sometime. Finally, I took the plunge, and I didn't really enjoy it still.
Yeah, so I think the biggest issue with the game is it doesn't have its own identity. It's trying really, really hard to combine Assassin's Creed elements with the success of The Witcher 3. And I'm not going to pretend that that's not what they're trying to emulate, because it definitely is. Ubisoft saw The Witcher 3, and they thought that that's the direction they should take Assassin's Creed, and it didn't work 100%. I think the plot of Assassin's Creed Origins is pretty good, but you have to wade through these incomplete RPG mechanics to get to it. And it's like, I guess the best example of this is if you're level 10 and your opponent's level 15 and you sneak up behind them for an assassination, you just don't do enough damage for no reason. It's just numbers. It's nothing to do with your character's skill anymore. It's all to do with these arbitrary numbers basically now. And I think that it was a direction they tried to go in, and in some senses it worked, in some senses it didn't. But definitely I think...
well, I'll tell you, in most senses it didn't.
Yeah, in most senses it didn't. I think really the only thing that keeps Assassin's Creed Origins kind of fresh for me is that it has a pretty big and enjoyable open world in terms of, like, the ancient Egyptian places you can go to. They even post-launch added like this tour mode because they had so many areas based on real or areas and things based on real artifacts. So there's like one of them is like a pot that's actually in like a museum, and you can see like what it possibly could have looked like when it was still painted and whatnot. So they definitely put a lot of effort into the world and the story, and I think in those two aspects they did good. They had a good team on board for that one, but the RPG mechanics that they tried to force into it really, really held it back.
Where they lost me is exactly that you just described about the kind of level of the enemy, which I think that's a really good as a guide point, right? But I think that I personally have always thought that's what it should always only be, and I even agree. Like, think this is an issue with Witcher 3 in a sense that obviously enemies are a level above you or whatever, but in Witcher 3 where you just have the skull there, where basically just means you can't kill them. I disagree with that completely. I think that it should be really hard to kill them, but you should still be rewarded if you have really good technique and you manage to do it right or get lucky sometimes, right? Same thing in like Dragon Age as well, that came out around that same time too. And so for me, when I was playing Assassin's Creed Origins, we got this early mission where you're trying to free, like, I guess a friend of a friend who's imprisoned in like a campsite somewhere, and pretty much all of the soldiers in there. I found it hard to do properly, like sneaking and do it stealthily, but pretty much all of the soldiers in there are like a level or two above where you're at this point, even though it's a very early mission, like one of the first 4 that you're given. And basically, I can't fight them because I die within seconds every time, and I just don't like that. I respect what they try to do, and that kind of brings us on to the last installment, which is Assassin's Creed Odyssey, set in ancient Greece, which is also a pretty cool setting, and one that we've sort of been waiting for, I guess. What do we think of that one? You've played that one, I guess?
Yeah, okay, so I have a lot to say about this one. I could do a whole video on how much I genuinely despise this game, but there's not, this video is already long enough. We've already talked about all the other games, and I don't want to fully sour the experience, but I think everything...
Well, give us a couple of minutes at least, yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
Give us at least a couple of minutes.
So I think everything that Origins did right and wrong, Odyssey took and did more wrong. So for example, let's just go into the RPG aspect. So in Odyssey, again, they're still trying to emulate this sort of Witcher 3 RPG style, and the problem with it is, right off the get-go, you're allowed to pick between 2 characters. You can either be Cassandra or Alexios, brother male or sister female. It doesn't really matter, the story's kind of the same either way. The only thing that changes, spoiler alert, is that one of the villains is the one you didn't pick later on. So they're trying to get this RPG style where your character doesn't actually make sense to begin with. So all the way back in Assassin's Creed 1 with the Animus, the whole idea is you're living through your ancestors' sort of experiences in the Animus, and you can't really do that if your ancestor can be swapped out at will with one or the other. Their experiences are surely going to be different. I don't understand why they couldn't just pick one of the 2 and just had that be the same. So, if Cassandra's the canon character, make it only Cassandra. Why give us a choice? What's the point? It just doesn't make sense in Assassin's Creed to me, and it's too forced. But continuing on that same string, when it comes to things like dialogue as well, you can't actually really change anything. So in The Witcher, for example, as Geralt, the dialogue is all based around the fact that this person is talking to Geralt, and it makes sense in the world. You can't change too much because Geralt always sort of, you could be a bit more of an asshole, you can ask for a bit more money, but ultimately it's still Geralt making these choices, and it would still correspond to what Geralt would do. But in this, it pretends like you're playing a full-on RPG where you can decide whether to take the contract, or you can decide whether to not, kill said target, or you can decide to romance this character, and none of it matters at all. It's like, I think it's the same analogy you used with No Man's Sky when that first came out, and it's the fact that the game is infinitely wide. They're trying to make this massive ancient Greek world, but it's so shallow that there's just nothing to do after the base level. And I think that's my biggest issue with the game, is they have all these systems in place. They have castles that you can change from Spartan control to Athenian control, or vice versa, and you can do these battlefield segments where you join the battle on either Sparta or Athens' side as a mercenary, and you can help one side win. But it means nothing at all. It does nothing for the game. It's just fluff. I don't think it's a worthy successor to the Assassin's Creed title, and possibly my least favorite game in the whole series.
Okay, so that's a lot to break down. I mean, I haven't bought that one yet either, because I was ready to if Origins grabbed me, and I found that Origins already didn't grab me, and so I'm disappointed. By the way, I didn't want to not like these games. I want to like these games. The first 4 Assassin's Creed games, I mean, as in 1, 2, Brotherhood, and Revelations, were, I think, 4 very, very good games, and a franchise that I could have bought into, except that every release since then pretty much has been awful. I want to like this, but I think for me, if we could summarize where the franchise has gone wrong over the years, I think has been killing off the modern day story in a sort of real lacking of payoff kind of way, a bit prematurely. And I think it's probably seeing the dollar signs and thinking like each historical setting is, you know, will make for a good game, rather than thinking about where is the story going, where are the characters going, and therefore, you know, where the setting needs to be to facilitate that, rather than it's almost like picking the setting first and working backwards. And we all know that when you try and do, say for example, a new trilogy of a particular fan favorite franchise, and you start that new trilogy off by saying we wanted to make a strong female lead, that trilogy is not being set up for success, is it? So we know that if you say I want to make a game that's set in this setting, and you work backwards from there, there's a high chance that it's not going to be a great game, because it's the wrong reason for that setting. Almost, it's just purely wanting the setting. So I think that's something, and also probably trying to compete with something like Call of Duty, which is essentially annual or biennial, releases that just make it money every time, or a FIFA, for example, money-wise. Okay, so that's kind of, this video is not really yet about how to make it better. I think our next video we're about to release is one way that we think it can really start to come back. Do you have anything you want to add on to these topics? Because I think undoubtedly, you're talking about two very, very big Assassin's Creed fans here. I mean, it sounds to me like you bought and played every game, regardless.
Yeah.
But and I haven't. But I wish I would rather have been able to, because I'd rather they were good. But we're definitely talking about two very big Assassin's Creed fans from the beginning. And what we're going to allude to, I guess, is that they made this other franchise that's set within the same universe. And let's get onto this video straight away in a minute, and we'll release it same day, I think, for people if they want to listen to both back to back. But I think that Watch Dogs is in the same universe. It's confirmed. So with a lacking modern storyline now for Assassin's Creed, because they've killed off the original characters, for me the logical next step would be to incorporate Watch Dogs as the modern storyline and have elements of both within the same game.
Yeah, so we'll definitely go into a pretty big sort of explanation of what we mean by that, but we just think that since they made the call to kill off Desmond and Lucy in pretty much the same game, we think that, the Watch Dogs universe, having already been confirmed as in the same universe as Assassin's Creed, Abstergo exists, a character from Assassin's Creed Black Flag gets killed in Watch Dogs 1, like, it's all confirmed. It should just become one and the same. We should have, seeing as they're already kind of avoiding the future segments or the present day segments in modern day Assassin's Creed games, basically ever since Assassin's Creed Black Flag, the modern day has been neglected. There's no reason not to just fully cut it out and then have the modern day be replaced by the Watch Dogs franchise, and have Watch Dogs games be the modern day Assassin's Creed, and Assassin's Creed be the times that you're in the Animus, and that way you can have two franchises tied in together, like, a bit more strongly, not as loose as it is now, a bit more, heavily, but still maintain the two franchises, and that's what we're going to talk about next. So definitely stay tuned for that, and we'll give you a proper rundown of what we mean by that.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, just as a thing, this is not a formal review or anything, but I think we're talking about a franchise that went from 8s and 9s out of 10 solidly to probably 4s and 5s out of 10, if that, over the last few years, and I think that I respect that they revamped it with Origins, but I don't think it quite worked. But I respect that. But if anyone from Ubisoft happens to be listening, all 5 of you that are listening right now, if any of you work for Ubisoft, check out our next video, because we'll give you some ideas, and if you want them, then give us a call. In any case, I think we'll see you in the next video.
Yep, we'll see you next time.
Bye.